Welcome to our discussion regarding Chapter 2, Business Ethics and Social Responsibility. This is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. If you recall from my profile, I spent the last 7 years of my career at Marathon managing their ethics department. So let's get started with this very important subject. I want to look at two different ends of the spectrum here. The first is this quote from the movie Wall Street. This is Gordon Gekko saying, quote, "The point is that greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works. Greed in all of its forms. Greed for life, greed for money, for love, knowledge has marked the upward surge of mankind." So that's on one end of the spectrum, and certainly greed has been the engine that has motivated or has pushed along different achievements in the world. On the other side of the spectrum is this quote from Abraham Lincoln talking about the better angels of our nature. So this idea of ethics is this constant push and pull between these two ends of the spectrum, between greed and between listening to our better angels. Now, much like we talked about law and business law, here we're talking about ethics and business ethics. These quotes come from our book. You can read those there. But ethics is simply a study and practice of decisions about what is good or right. And business ethics is the application of those ethics to business. Our book talks about the WH framework for decision making, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But I really like the decision-making process that we used in Marathon's Code of Business Conduct. So this is taken from, again, Marathon's Code of Business Conduct. And we had 4 items that we encouraged employees to think about when they were trying to make a decision. And the first one was, is this action legal? Recall we talked about this in our last session on Chapter 1. And so the first item here is this action legal? That's the first question that you want to ask. Is what I'm about to do, is it against the law? And if it is against the law, obviously then it's full stop. You don't want to do that. But what we're really emphasizing here is this is just the first step in the process of making an ethical decision. The law is the minimum standard that you should be thinking about. So not every action that is legal is going to be necessarily ethical or moral. But again, certainly if it's not legal, you should stop right there and not do the thing that you're thinking about. So again, the first step is this action legal? The second step with regard to ethical decision making that we talked about at Marathon is does this action align with the company's values, policies, and guidelines? So first, is it legal? If it's not legal, then you shouldn't do the thing that you're thinking about doing. But the second step is we'd ask employees to ask themselves whether the action that they were going to take aligned with our values, with the policies of the companies, or with our guidelines. So, for example, one guideline we had was with regard to the acceptance of meals, gifts, and entertainment, and supported the overall policy of conflicts of interest. We didn't want employees to have a conflict of interest, and you should be familiar with that idea of conflicts of interest. But with regard to this guideline, we would ask employees to report or ask permission, if you will, before they would accept a gift of over $100 and ask permission of a supervisor whether they would accept entertainment of over $200. And especially with entertainment, it can be very important to build relationships to engage in entertainment with vendors. So that's something that can be valuable. But we as a company wanted to make sure that employees were not being unduly influenced by entertainment. So, or the value of entertainment, I should say. So, when thinking about taking a specific action, oh, should I go on this hunting trip offered by one of my vendors? Then we would ask them to think about, well, how does that match up with our guideline of $200? And if it's more than $200, then we would ask the employee to seek permission first from their supervisor. So again, is the action legal? No, it's not. Stop. Does an action align with the company's values, policies, and guidelines? If it doesn't, but it's legal, we would still say, don't do it. The third item that we would ask employees to think about is, if you take this action, how will it make you feel? Sometimes something is legal, sometimes it's not. Can't find a policy against it, can't find a guideline against it, but you just don't feel right about it. And in this instance, you should listen to your feelings. And I would say that if you don't feel good about the decision, then maybe talk to your supervisor or talk to your colleagues to try to get a sense of why you don't feel good about the decision that you're thinking about making. Let me give an example of that. So this is an excerpt from the Department of Justice, and it talks about pilot Flying J entering into a criminal enforcement agreement. What Pilot Flying J had done was they owed their customers a certain amount in rebates. But because the rebate was so hard to figure out, the employees, or some employees, figured out a way to short their customers on those rebates, knowing that they would never know the difference. And so here you can see that Pilot Flying J had to enter into a criminal enforcement agreement whereby they had to pay the government $92 million in a monetary penalty. Now, as part of this whole process, Pilot Flying J's headquarters were searched. And this is an excerpt from the affidavit in support of a search warrant application. But I wanted to point this out to you because it goes to this idea of feelings. So here's a conversation that's happening between an employee and a CHS, or in other words, a confidential human source. And so here the employee says, my uncomfortableness is just the mere fact that I just don't see it unethical, because I get it a little bit. Well, let's stop right here. So here the employee is saying, what I'm about to do or have done, I just don't see it being unethical. We can really question that, but sometimes in the realm of work, we don't have a clear sense of whether something is ethical or unethical. But look what this person goes on to say. So I wouldn't say it's unethical, I'm just uncomfortable with it. And the fact that when you get caught, you have to do so much backpedaling. You lose a ton of credibility, whether you can cover it with a story or not. It's hard to operate that way. And then at the end, the employee says, sometimes you have to do the things that are uncomfortable as well. So I'd really challenge that because, again, when you start to feel uncomfortable about something, when those red flags start going off in your head, that's where you need to stop and think and go through your process. Is it legal? Well, yes, maybe. Here, no. Does it violate a policy or guideline? And finally, how does it make you feel? And here, this employee is indicating that they don't feel great about it. This is where you should stop and start asking somebody else for their advice, your supervisor or, again, a colleague. And finally, the fourth element, which will be a nice segue into our discussion coming up, is how will this action look if it was made public or reported in the media? I think used to be this was how would it look if it was reported in the newspaper, but nowadays we have social media, and so you need to think about, okay, if this decision I made was made public and it was reported on YouTube or TikTok or Twitter or Instagram or something, if that was laid out there and it was advertised or made public in one of those media types, how would it look? Would I be embarrassed? Would it be an embarrassment for the company? So think about, again, how will this action look if it was made public or reported in the media? If you're thinking, I don't really want somebody to know about this, then it's a good time to stop and think about whether that is the right decision to make. Now, again, this WH framework for business ethics. And so the W stands for who, or the stakeholders. And so in making decisions, you need to be thinking about customers, owners or investors, management, employees, the community, and future generations. And so you need to keep all those stakeholders in mind when you're making decisions. And then the how. These are the guidelines you should use in making the decision. So you have the public disclosure test. We just talked about that. How would it look if it was made public via social media or the newspaper? The universalization test. This is very much like perhaps your mom used to say, well, what if everyone acted the way you did? What kind of world would we be living in? So universalization test. And then finally, the golden rule is treating others the way you would want to be treated. With what you're going to be doing, if you think maybe you're going to be disadvantaging a customer, well, is that the way you would want to be treated? So certainly applying the golden rule to making ethical decisions is a good way to go about making those decisions. Social responsibility. So this chapter is called Business Ethics and Social Responsibility, and we've touched on social responsibility a little bit so far in this lecture, but now I really want to focus on it for a minute. So social responsibility. These are our responsibilities to our stakeholders. Really, when we talk about a business, we think about the main goal of a business is to make profit. If you started your own business, why did you start your own business? Well, probably it's because you wanted to earn a living. You wanted to make a profit. Shareholders of a corporation are very interested in dividends, are very interested in the fact that your company would make a profit. But there's also a social responsibility by a company. Let's look at IBM here. IBM has listed some examples of CSR, or corporate social responsibility. And so you can see that first one there, donating a percentage of profits to environmental or social causes. Wow, donating a percentage of profits? That seems to run in contravention of what many would think is a major goal of a corporation, and that is to make profits. But here IBM has obviously decided that donating a percentage of the profits is a good thing with regard to social responsibility. And I would say indirectly it does benefit the company and perhaps even maximizes profits in the long run. See the second one, committing to using recycled and eco-friendly materials. Third, sourcing fair trade materials and ingredients. So you can pause this and look at this list if you'd like. The last one there, establishing employee well-being programs to support their physical and mental health. So again, the idea here is this, we sort of started off when we talked about ethics of balancing one edge of the spectrum with another. And here we're kind of doing something similar here. On one side, you have maximizing profits, but you really shouldn't be doing that to the detriment of the rest of your stakeholders, or maximizing your social responsibility and not making any money. So there has to be a balance. And I would argue that both can be achieved. This concludes our discussion regarding Chapter 2, Business Ethics and Social Responsibility. Thanks for your attention, and we'll see you next time.